attending, and thank you to the ISOC for putting in the effort in getting all of you here. I recently did this lecture at Edinburgh to a similar sized lecture hall with about a tenth of the people. So I had to say to Mohammed that we needed a certain number of people. And I think we're doing okay. My name is Imran Osman, as has been mentioned. I work with the 1E group. I'm a private equity analyst. Anybody want to hazard a guess at what somebody in that position does? No one? Yes, sir.
Analyze private investment opportunities.
Yeah, it's that simple. Private investment opportunities. So I get to know people with money. I befriend people with money. I befriend people with investment opportunity. And I bring them together, and our organisation takes a small fee for the service. It's relevant to what we're going to talk about today, because ultimately this does relate to finance and how business grows within a Western context mainly. What we're going to look at today is perhaps an alternative perspective to the one that you're used to. No doubt most people will blame the banking institutions for the problems that we have. I mean, a quick raise of hands. Does anybody have a problem with the title? Do you think that the banks have causes these problems? Okay, about 25%. Okay, so the rest of you are obviously enlightened and have no cause to be here. I'm known to go over time, which is why I've told Miriam here to tell me when I have 15 minutes left, and then I'll rush through 70% of the presentation. Question and answers will be at the end. Enjoy. Okay. Pretty standard stuff. A definition. I'm going to make this interactive. No falling asleep at the back or the front. A definition of the credit crunch, please. Feel free. If nobody else will, I'll just ask you.
The supply of credit becomes limited.
The supply of credit becomes limited. Anybody else? Am I in your way?
No. Institutions don't trust each other, so they don't want to lend any money.
Mistrusting institutions, so lending stops. Okay, we don't need to go much further. This is what we'll start with. It's pretty conventional, it's pretty basic, and it's pretty much what you said. A sudden reduction in the availability of commercial credit. Okay, so this is what we have experienced since 2007. I think it was Paribas in France that first raised its concerns about the subprime mortgage market in the US. Actually, just so I can gauge this presentation properly, who here is from a finance background? Wow, okay. Did you put your hand up? Ah. PPE. Who's doing PPE? Okay.
No, not in PP, it's in PPs.
Okay. Wow.
It's management students here as well.
Great. Should we just turn these lights down a bit? Is that good? Okay. Right, the credit crunch. Quick recap. So, prior to mid-2007, everything was great, wasn't it? Banks were lending, property prices were going up. The Muslim community in general was investing more money in property than it ever has done before. Everyone was building personal property portfolios. Islamic mortgages had been developed so that we could get onto the bandwagon of this economic boom. And the way in which it happened was relatively straightforward. Credit was being offered to people who couldn't afford to pay it back. Seems sensible. And these were called subprime mortgages. People not worthy. Basically, subprime is another way of saying people not really worthy of credit, but the banks had worked out a way of getting credit to them. Anybody know what CDO is? Collateralized debt obligation. Again, we'll cut through the jargon. That simply means getting together a whole load of contracts with people who've taken up subprime mortgages and selling them, because they have a value, don't they? If you owe money to the bank, that's an income over a period of time. If you bring them together in a group of a few thousand, or maybe 10,000, you now have a product to sell. And so the banks, which had established this subprime market, had somehow given this bundle a rating, a top rating in terms of its security and risk. That was then sold to other banks around the world, who were obviously very interested in the US housing market. Does that make sense? Great. Okay. So, then we have the subprime problems. Again, it was Paribas, the French bank, that first alerted the market to the issues, which were basically these people who couldn't afford mortgages weren't making repayments. Blinded by science, really. The next stage in this process meant that we had shockwaves being sent across the globe, which did center in the US and hit the major Western-dependent financial markets. And this was obviously the UK, Netherlands, Belgium, France, China, Australia. That's not to say that the areas in grey were not affected. They, of course, were affected, but they were secondary markets. As we'll see as we go through this, the entire financial system is based upon debt. Therefore, everything is interconnected and everyone has been affected. But this was really a crisis of confidence in the market, in the debt market. Actually, nothing had really happened as of yet, but the banks realized that what they held had little value for their investors. But what they really didn't know is how much of this toxic debt they actually owned. So they couldn't do anything except put a brake on lending, which meant that the whole financial system froze. At a micro level, consider your own finances. Okay? When the money runs out, what happens? You don't eat, you don't study, you get depressed, you leave university, life stops. That source of capital is your lifeblood. And it was the lifeblood of the global economy. Okay, so there are measures in place to counteract this. So the US Federal Bank and the EU Central Bank decided that they would flood the market with money in order to get the banks to lend to each other, and hence for that to filter its way down to the general masses. Okay, and this chart pretty much indicates a liquidity crisis. It's basically the base rate of interest and LIBOR, and how that was affected basically from the 2000 all the way across to 2008. Okay, banks in turmoil. So this initial injection of cash really didn't do much. The banks were still uncertain about the level of toxic debt. There was a run on Northern Rock. The UK economy was 20 to 25% reliant on financial services. This is the message that the UK wishes to give the world. We don't make anything anymore. We don't make cars, we don't make clothes, we don't make anything. But what we do is provide services. So this was really quite embarrassing for the UK. These pictures were beamed across the world with people queuing up for their money from Northern Rock. So, what happened? A slap in the face to capitalist free marketeers. The government had to buy the bank. So privatisation, in a way, failed at that point. Bear Stearns, another huge bank, one of the world's largest banks in the States, also had to be nationalised. I mean, it's very interesting. One of the principles of the free market is that the market dictates what survives and what doesn't. We dictate that. But in the case of finance, we have a special entity. Because if we allow that to collapse, as it would have under free market rules, it would have affected so much else. So if you consider yourself in the position of a banker who's in a position to lend money, you pretty much know that ultimately the government is going to come and bail you out. It's an issue to be discussed from an ideological perspective, but we're not here to delve into that too much. Okay, so this is how the US bailout happened. A little less complicated than the UK. International money markets, that cloud in the sky which provides money, provides about 700 billion to the US government, which then pumps that into its banking system. The US government then takes ownership of the toxic assets from those banks. So basically replacing bad money with good. In the hope that the banks then begin to lend to each other, and ultimately businesses and individuals are then able to access that credit. And we're kind